The room was old, ancient even. Heavy velvet curtains, the color of dried blood, blocked the Parisian moonlight. Around a polished mahogany table sat 5 figures. They were not kings or presidents in the traditional sense. They were something else entirely, power brokers, shadow puppeteers. Their faces remained obscured by the dim, atmospheric lighting, their voices low and measured. They spoke of a nation that had grown too powerful, too loud. America. A direct confrontation was impossible, they all agreed. The cost would be too high, the outcome too uncertain. A new kind of war was needed, a war fought not with soldiers and bombs but with something far more insidious, a war for the soul of the nation itself. Their plan was elegant in its wickedness. It was a strategy born from the darkest corners of human psychology. They would not attack from the outside, they would rot the foundation from within. The weapon of choice? Belief. They would create and fund a network of seemingly harmless spiritual groups, or cults. These groups, under the banner of enlightenment and community, would be their Trojan horses. Each cult would have a unique name and a charismatic leader, but their core doctrine, their silent creed, would be the same. It was a creed of subtle subversion, designed to erode trust in established institutions and sow seeds of quiet discord. The leaders gathered in Paris that night sealed their pact with a silent nod. The first funds were wired before dawn. The chosen instrument of their design was a philosophy they called the harmonic convergence. It preached inner peace through detachment from societal norms. It sounded benign, even enlightened. The doctrine was meticulously crafted to appeal to the lonely, the disenfranchised, the seekers of meaning in a world they felt had left them behind. It offered a family to the forgotten. It offered answers to those drowning in questions. The leaders knew that in the quiet, isolated corners of America, there were thousands of such souls, fertile ground for their carefully planted seeds of doubt. The cults would offer a sanctuary, a purpose, and in return, they would ask for only one thing: absolute loyalty to the creed. The leaders dispersed as silently as they had gathered, melting back into the shadows of global politics and finance. They left behind no records, no minutes, no evidence of their clandestine meeting. The only trace of their covenant was the quiet movement of vast sums of money through a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore accounts. The funds flowed like an invisible river, destined for small, unassuming towns across the American heartland. There, the first apostles of the Silent Creed were already waiting, preparing to build their sanctuaries and welcome the lost into their fold. The war had begun, and America had no idea it was even under attack. The first chapter of the Community of Inner Light opened in Havenwood, Nebraska. Population 1,200. It was a town forgotten by time, a place where young people left and never returned. The community bought an old abandoned church on the edge of town. They repaired the roof and painted the walls. They held potlucks and offered free counseling. Their leader, a serene man named Elias Vance, spoke of finding tranquility in a chaotic world. He was charismatic, his words a soothing balm for the town's weary residents. The initial funding, which arrived from an anonymous philanthropic trust, seemed like a miracle. It allowed them to build a new community center and offer financial aid to struggling families. Havenwood began to feel a flicker of hope. The whispers began subtly. Elias spoke of the corruption of the material world. He hinted that the systems governing the country, the government, the media, the banks, were designed to keep people in a state of anxiety and fear. Only by detaching, he preached, could one find true freedom. His followers listened, captivated. These were people who felt let down by those very systems. They had lost jobs, farms, and faith. Elias gave them a new narrative, a new enemy. It was not their fault, it was the fault of a sick society. The community was their medicine, their shield. The secret creed was taking root, not as a conspiracy, but as a comforting truth. Soon, other chapters appeared. The Path of Serenity in rural Pennsylvania. The Circle of Renewal in northern Idaho. Each had a different name but the same core message and the same mysterious source of endless funding. Young, intelligent members were identified and given special attention. They were encouraged to pursue higher education and careers in specific fields. The community would pay for it all. Law school, journalism degrees, police academy training. They were told it was their sacred duty to bring the light of the creed into the darkest corners of the system, to become beacons of change from within. They were not spies, they were missionaries.
I joined the community in Havenwood after my family lost our farm. They gave me a home, an education, and a sense of purpose. I excelled, And Elias himself chose me for a path in finance. I was sent to a prestigious university, my tuition paid in full by the anonymous trust. I believed I was going to help build a better, more honest financial system. I saw myself as a reformer, an agent of positive change. I did not yet understand that the change I was being trained to enact was not one of creation, but of carefully orchestrated decay.
The web was being woven, thread by invisible thread. Years passed. The seeds planted in towns like Havenwood had grown into a sprawling, unseen network. Sarah, now a rising analyst at a major Wall Street bank, was a model success story. She was smart, dedicated, and followed the creed's principles of quiet influence. She and others like her, embedded in the world of high finance, subtly redirected investments. They favored companies that aligned with the creed's anti-establishment ethos and created minor, almost imperceptible instabilities in market sectors vital to national security. It was never enough to cause a full-blown crash, but it was enough to create a constant, low-grade fever in the economy, fostering a climate of uncertainty and distrust. Meanwhile, other members of the creed had risen through the ranks of law enforcement and local government. Police officers who were members of the Path of Serenity would deprioritize certain investigations, especially those that might expose the cult's financial dealings. They would misfile evidence or slow down bureaucratic processes involving their brethren. In city halls, cult members in administrative roles would grant permits and licenses to businesses owned by fellow followers, creating a shadow economy that operated just beneath the surface of legality. They were not mustache-twirling villains, they were cogs in a machine, each performing a small, deniable action that contributed to the larger goal of systemic erosion. The media was the third front. Journalists who were products of the Circle of Renewal now held positions at local news stations and even some national outlets. They never fabricated stories wholesale. Instead, they mastered the art of spin. They would amplify narratives of social division, frame political disagreements as irreconcilable, and subtly promote a sense of hopelessness. During national crises, a natural disaster, a political scandal, they would inject stories that questioned the competency and motives of federal responders, spreading confusion and undermining public confidence. They were not lying, merely curating the truth to fit the creed's objective, a population so divided and confused it could no longer unite against any threat. This brings us to our protagonists.
Deep within the financial machine, I started to notice patterns that felt wrong. The investment strategies I was ordered to execute seemed designed not for profit, but for disruption.
Ben Carter, an independent journalist, was always a relentless skeptic. He had been chased out of mainstream media for refusing to toe any party line. He started connecting the dots. There was a strange correlation between a series of minor economic anomalies and the rise of certain New Age groups in the Midwest. He couldn't prove anything yet, but his instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong. He had a thread, and he was determined to pull it. Ben Carter's investigation led him to Havenwood. He started digging into the community of Inner Light and its miraculous funding. He interviewed former members who spoke of a gentle but firm indoctrination, of being steered towards specific careers. The more he dug, the more he felt a cold dread. This was bigger than one strange cult. He discovered the offshore trusts, the shell corporations, and the impossible-to-trace lines of funding that all pointed back toward a handful of rival foreign powers. He saw the blueprint. It was a silent invasion, a meticulously planned campaign to dismantle America without firing a single shot. He had the how, but he needed a who. He needed someone from the inside.
My doubts had festered into fear. An instruction came down through a secret channel, ordering me to execute a series of trades that would cripple a major telecommunications company. It was no longer subtle. It was sabotage. My conscience, a part of me I thought the creed had erased, screamed in protest. I accessed encrypted files, digging deeper into the trust that had paid for my life. What I found chilled me to the bone. Direct communications linking the creed's financial directives to intelligence agencies in the very countries Ben Carter was investigating. I was not a missionary. I was a weapon. I had to get out.
Their paths finally crossed through a secured, encrypted message. Sarah, using a burner phone, reached out to the one journalist she knew wouldn't dismiss her as a lunatic. She had the proof transaction logs, internal memos, the very architecture of the silent creed.
We met in a darkened parking garage. I was trembling as I handed Ben a drive containing everything. It was the key, the Rosetta Stone of the conspiracy.
For the first time, the full scope of the plot was clear. A multi-pronged attack on the nation's economy, its security, and its very sense of reality, all orchestrated by foreign adversaries.
Armed with Sarah's evidence, Ben published his story on his independent news site. It was an explosion. The story detailed the cults, the foreign funding, and the members embedded in positions of power.
Federal investigations were launched, some key figures were arrested, and several of the cult's chapters were disbanded. The plot was partially thwarted, the immediate danger averted, but the victory was incomplete. Many members of the Creed remained hidden, their faith unshaken, still working silently within the system. The foreign powers denied everything, decrying the story as baseless propaganda. The threat was not gone. It had simply receded back into the shadows, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. America had been warned, but the silent war was far from over. This story is a work of fiction and is not based on real events.